So you want to get the best images possible using Adobe Photoshop 2025. How do you do it? Well, in this video, it's going to be the first in a series, and we're going to talk about how to set the program up correctly so it works properly for you, so you get the most that the program has to offer. Because if you want to do work on images, it's best if you set it up so it works correctly in the first place instead of trying to do workarounds all the time while you're working on images. But first of all, who am I? My name is Mike Patterson. I've been a full-time award-winning professional photographer located here in Western Canada for 40 years. Make my living exclusively from photography and have for an entire time. And in this video, I'm going to go through and show you some hints and suggestions that I give to my students and to my customers on how to get the most from, well, Adobe Photoshop 2025. But before we get into that, please click on the like button down below, click on the subscribe button for my channel here, and click on that little bell so you're notified when I put out additional videos, and let's get into it. Now, I've been using Photoshop since it first came out. I've been trained by Adobe many years ago on how to use the program. And I can tell you, it's frustrating to get into. It's frustrating to use if it's not set up correctly. And I hear from people all the time saying, well, I don't understand. How does this work? What does this do? How can I do this? How come it's so easy for you? Well, like anything, it's best if you set it up so it works correctly, so it works, well, the way that you understand it to work, and you don't have to go through and struggle with it all the time. And in this video, that's what we're going to do. So let's get started with the very first thing. The very first thing that I tell people to set up is go down to your preferences, go up to General, go down to your Performance, and set up the amount of memory used to as high as you possibly can set it. Now, you can set this at different levels. How do you know how high to set it? Well, here's the hint that I give out to people, or suggestion I give out to people. If you're using your computer for just Photoshop, you're not streaming music and videos while you're trying to use Photoshop, you're just using it for Photoshop, crank the amount of RAM up to the 90, 95, even 98% mark. I find 95 is just about right, just about perfect for what this computer does. If you're using other programs at the same time, if you're listening to music, if you're listening to YouTube, if you're trying to edit videos and so on and so forth in the background, the amount of RAM will have to be turned down. Now, if your computer is newer with a ton of RAM, you can crank it up a little bit higher. If it's an older computer, you have to go down a little bit more. You're going to have to work on that for your computer. And by, well, knowing your computer, knowing how it works, well, what it works with, you can adjust that so it works correctly. All right, the next thing, scratch discs. What the heck are scratch discs? Well, imagine that you're a woodworker, or maybe you are a woodworker, or you're a baker, or you're an electrician, or you're a mechanic. When you get tools out, you hate to go back and put the tools away if you're going to need them in another few minutes. It's just a waste of your time. So you put stuff on a counter, you put stuff on a desk, you put stuff on a workbench. But your workbench is only so big, your counter is only so big. Well, in Photoshop, the scratch disk is like your counter. It's where it puts extra stuff when it's working, so it has some place to put it and it doesn't have to shut it down, it doesn't have to shut it off, so on and so forth. That's called a scratch disk. And the more scratch disk space you have, the better, the faster, the more reliable Photoshop will work. But there's some things that you have to watch out for. So how do you set up a scratch disk? Well, it's quite easy. Again, under Preferences, you go down to where it says a scratch disk. Pretty straightforward. And then you add scratch disks in here that are connected to your computer. Now, you may see stuff without the check mark on it. It knows that you have a hard drive there or an SSD drive there, but it hasn't allocated it for use with Photoshop. You want to click it so that it allocates it. The one in first place, I always recommend being an internal drive, preferably an SSD drive. And if it's an internal drive, whether it's SSD or a hard disk, it will work faster than any external drives. If you're using external drives, please only use it if it's on USB 3 or above. USB 2, a little bit slow. USB 1, very slow. So if it's on USB 3 and above, it works the best. It really does. It really works the best. Or if you want a computer specifically built for doing Photoshop, put some internal hard drives in there that aren't running anything else but your scratch disk. They don't have to be huge. If you get a 512 drive in there, that would be more than enough. If you get 2 gigs, 4 gigs, 8 gigs, that would be enough. Just put a drive in there that has a lot of space, doesn't cost you a lot of money, and that works with your computer, and use it as a scratch disk drive. It works really well. If you want your scratch disk to work the best, have a separate disk, whether it be a hard disk or whether it be an SSD drive, that just runs your scratch disk. By doing this, that will work the best for Photoshop, and it will run the fastest. Don't have anything else on there, just your scratch disk. All right, so now you got this set up. But there's some other problems. Here's one of the first ones. When I install Photoshop here in Canada, it sets up all the measurements in, well, metric. And I don't do much in metric. 99.999% of my stuff that I do is in inches. Why? Because we buy frames that are 8 by 10 frames, 11 by 14 frames, 16 by 20 frames. And if I have to go in every time and tell it that I'm working in inches, it wastes a lot of my time. So go in and set it up so that it's working in the format that you want it to work in. How do you do that? Well, it's simple. Again, under Preferences, go down to Units and Rulers and change the rulers into what you want. And for me, it's inches. While you're in here, you also want to make sure that your print resolution is set to at least 300. I don't go any higher. I like it at 300, and it's pixels per inch. That works the best for me. Now, stop here. Now that you've done some work, you've accepted all the changes you've done, you click OK. Then go in and go File and Exit so that you leave Photoshop and then restart Photoshop again so that everything that you've put in there has been saved. Because Photoshop has this habit of crashing, or you shut down Photoshop in a different way and it doesn't save your changes. So go in and make sure that you've shut down Photoshop by using the exit, and then come back in. You can check to make sure everything's there. It should be. But don't make these changes, then go start working on some pictures, have Photoshop crash or shut your computer down the wrong way or whatever. Make sure that you're saving and exiting. All right, so now you got that done. What should you worry about next? What should you set up next? Well, the next thing that you want to set up is your color space. If you're printing, if you're sending stuff to a printer, you can put in the different color profiles. But I recommend to all my customers and my students to set it up so that it's working in Adobe RGB 1998 color space. And that works almost 100% for most of my customers, and even for me, so that if somebody brings me in something, I know what color space it's put in. So how do you set it up? Well, you do two things. The first thing that you do is you go in, you go to Edit, you go down to Color Settings, and you go in and you want to change RGB to Adobe RGB 1998. You do that by this menu here. You scroll through until you find it, you click on it, and it's set. The next thing you want to do is you want to go in and change RGB to convert to working RGB. That means that when you open a file, it converts it to RGB if it's not already there. So that's the first thing. Save that. Then you want to go in and you want to go to Proof Setup. You want to go to Custom, and you want to set that also to Adobe RGB 1998. Click on that, and again, if you've done that for the first time, go to File, go to Exit, and that will have it saved on your computer. By doing that, it'll set up your computer so that it's going to work properly. Up to this point, we've got so many things fixed here, and it's going to work a lot better, faster, and more reliably for what you do. But now, here's a big thing. The workspace. I don't like the way that Photoshop sends the workspace. I really don't. To me, it doesn't work. So let's set up the workspace so that it works for you. Now, you don't have to use the exact settings that I use. It's entirely up to you. But these are the settings that I like to use and how I like my workspace set up. First thing, the toolbar on the side. I really don't like the long toolbar. I prefer it if it's the double toolbar here. Now, the other thing is, I don't like it on the side because I like to move it around. So if you drag the toolbar, you can actually separate it from the side. You can drop it where you want it, and you can now move it around wherever you want to work. I keep it over the side until I start to work, and then I move it around as I like it. The next thing is I hate a lot of this stuff on the side. These just aren't for me. These just don't work for me. Now, you can go in and you can drag them out. Then you can hit the X and it'll get rid of them. So drag it out, hit the X, drag it out, hit the X, and you can get rid of it. So you can set it up so that it works, again, for what you want. I don't use channels very often. I don't use paths very often. All of this stuff here, I don't use any of this stuff. So you can go in and get rid of all of this stuff. You can use just the information that you want. So I'm going in here, I'm going to get rid of all this. Here, you may want to leave info in here. I don't like it. I leave just layers. That's how I start. Now, once you do that, you can then go in, you can go into workspace, you can click new workspace. And then with the new workspace, you can go in and put in a name here. Click on keyboard shortcuts, click on menus, click on toolbar, click on save. I'm not going to do it because I've already got mine. But if you notice here, if you have your workspace set up in any way, shape, or form, if there's stuff all on here that you don't like, you can just go into Window. You can then go to Workspace. You can select the workspace that you've set up. And there it is. It comes back automatically. By doing that, it saves so much time, so much hassle. If you've clicked on something, if you made the workspace look strange or something, all you have to do is click on your name or whatever you called that workspace, and away it goes. You can set one up for photography. You can set one up for graphic design. You can set one up for photo restoration, whatever you want. And it brings up the exact menus, the layers, the functions, everything that you want, all set up, all laid out exactly for you. It works really good. Now, another thing that I hate with the newer Photoshops, absolutely hate. When you open an image and you start zooming in and zooming out, it moves the image all over the place and it's frustrating. Let me show you what I mean. All right, so we're going to go in here. We're going to open a recent document. All right, here we go. So now I'm going to go in and zoom. Okay, so I zoom in, then I want to zoom out, and all of a sudden my image is over here. It's not in the center anymore. I want to click here. Whoa, my image is zoomed off. I can do stuff. I can drag it back over every time I do it, and then I go back. I can now drag it back into the center again if I want to, but it's easy. It's easy to set up. What you do is you go into Edit. You go into Preferences. You go into Tools. And you go to Over Scroll and you take that off. Now when you click on OK, now when you zoom and you zoom back out, it stays in the middle. And that to me makes so much sense. And it just works so much better for me. And I think for a lot of people, it works so much better for. So that's another way to set it up so it works proper and correct. And it works a lot easier. But there's something else. And this is a big one that I get tons of customers coming to me with issues with. And that is how to size an image correctly. And they're struggling with the newer versions of Photoshop. It gets too confusing how to crop an image correctly. So let's show you how to set up your image so you can crop it correctly. All right, so to crop an image, to size an image, you want to click on here. You want to go to Crop Tool. Now, at the top, you can have this set up so that it looks so many different ways. And people come in with it all set up different ways, and they're going, what do you mean? Why is that this? And why does it look like this? Well, here's one of the problems that a lot of people go with. They go with ratio. Well, ratio doesn't mean a lot to many people. I recommend going to width, height, and then the resolution. Now, if I'm going in here, let's say I want this to be an 8 by 10. I crop 10, and then I'm going to go inches so that it knows I wanted it inches. And then it's going to go 8, and I'm going to put it in inches. Now, you only have to do the inches once. Then once it knows, it's going to keep it there. Then I'm going to go over here to tell it to 300. And now I've got 8 by 10. I can then go in and crop. And this will be an 8 by 10 at 300 pixels per inch. And that is an 8 by 10. If I want this to be an 8 by 12, I can crop it to 8 by 12. If I want this to be an 11 by 14, I can crop it to 11 by 14. But make sure that you're using the width, the height, and the resolution. It'll make it so much easier for you to work with. It really does. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video, and that's been another challenging one for so many people. Again, Photoshop changed this. It used to be where you'd be able to go in and go Save As, and you'd be able to select the format you want it to save as. Photoshop format, TIFF format, JPEG format. Well, they've changed that, and it's frustrating that they've changed it. So let's see what you can do to get it to save as a JPEG or in the format that you want. All right, so we're doing some work on here. Let's say we've got a few layers on here. Let's just get rid of this. We got a few extra layers on here. We go in and we say, well, we want to save this. Now, when you're working on anything and you have layers, I suggest saving it in Photoshop format, at least so that you have the one that you can go back in and work on at a later date. But let's say you've already saved this as a Photoshop format. Now you want to save it in a JPEG so you can take it to your printer. Well, you don't have that option here. It's just you've only got these that save in layers. But so you want to save this as a JPEG? You can't do that from here. But you can if you click on this Save a Copy, or if you want to, when you go File, Save as a Copy. And now you can actually select all these different formats, including JPEG, so you can save it. Now beware, because it's not going to save layers in here. These layers will be crushed down into one image. So I recommend saving it once as a PSD file, as a TIFF file, and then saving it as a JPEG after that. You go in, copy, save, and it saves as a copy in JPEG. And that works the best for saving if you're going to take it, print it, to get printed, or so on and so forth. So I hope that shows you some ways that you can get your Photoshop program to work correctly. I hope it helps you with not getting proper color, proper cropping, and I hope that it helps you to get the best quality images possible. So until next time, have yourself a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.